Hey team, Andre from High Performance Academy here. Welcome along to another one of our webinars, and this time we're going to be covering the topic of staged injection. You'll find out what staged injection is, probably a bit of a hint in the name there, but we'll look at the different ways we can incorporate staged injection and why we would use it in the first place, and then we'll have a look at the process of optimizing the calibration with staged injection. Now, obviously, I'm here in the studio. I'm not going to be doing this live on the dyno, and we're going to be looking through some data as well as the mapping software for our Motec M150 ECU that's fitted to our Nissan SR86. Just a little bit loud to try and run a webinar while we're actually running that on the dyno, and realistically, we don't actually need to run it on the dyno to get a gist of how the process goes anyway. Before we get on with the webinar, though, just as usual, a bit of an update as to what's been going on around HPA Labs over the last couple of weeks, and we've been pretty busy. No racing this time. It's probably the first time for a while in one of these pre-shows I haven't had a bit of a race update, but it's been actually a bit nice to get a little reprieve from the racing, and it's given us the opportunity to work through a few of the things that we have been wanting to upgrade or rectify that we've found with the SR86. Again, if you haven't been following us for a while, the Nissan SR86, it's a Toyota 86 fitted with the SR20 VE turbocharged engine, and over the course of last year we went through a fairly large aero upgrade with the car, thanks in part to some components from Top Stage Composites in Sydney, Australia. That included the rear wing, a carbon rear diffuser and a front splitter. The whole time we had intended to also fit a flat floor between the back of the front diffuser, front splitter I should say, and the front of the rear diffuser. And without that, really, in particular, the rear diffuser was never going to be able to do its job properly because it wasn't really getting good quality flow onto the diffuser in the first place. A few reasons why we didn't end up with the flat floor on it from the get-go. One was, as usual, we simply ran out of time and deemed it wasn't the highest priority, but at least at the start of the endurance season as well, we didn't have the time to get the air jacks into the car, and particularly with a flat floor on the car, it essentially gives us no good areas to jack the car up off the ground. So basically the air jacks kind of went hand in hand and were a necessary evil. Anyway, moving on, so we'll jump across to my laptop screen. Not a huge amount to see here, but this alloy frame that you can see here is the beginning of our fabricated frame to support that flat underfloor. And to make matters like a little bit harder to understand here, at the moment we do have the rear diffuser actually removed from the car, but that essentially sits there where I've just drawn. And the Top Stage Composites rear diffuser kind of has a square front edge on it, and in particular without the flat floor on it, we are of the impression, not aerodynamicists, I'll just point that out, but we are under the impression that that flat square edge was probably causing a lot of turbulence as air flowed onto the diffuser, and again, really probably rendering the diffuser maybe not quite useless, but certainly not as effective as it could be. So we're going to be getting that all fitted up. There's a few things to consider here, because obviously you can see I've got the exhaust in shot. That is actually hanging down at the moment because Jimmy is refabricating the exit off the turbocharger and raising the exhaust entirely, because now that we've switched to the Hollinger gearbox, we've got a little bit more room in the transmission tunnel. As the exhaust currently sits, it actually hangs down to clear the old gearbox mount, which means that it would actually stick out through the floor. So that's going to lift up, but one of the considerations, things that we're going to need to work through, I'll leave it at that, is the heat that the exhaust is going to generate. So we've got a few options here. One, if we just go with a full flat floor, we're probably going to end up generating way too much heat in the transmission tunnel, and that's probably going to be bad for a number of the components around that area, not least of all the gearbox itself. We do monitor gearbox temperature, but temporarily while we are setting this up, we are going to install a air temp sensor so we can actually see what the air temp in the transmission tunnel is getting up to. So that's one option. I doubt that's going to work well for endurance racing anyway, but we will be entering this in some shorter sprint races where we may be able to get away with that. The other option is we cut out the center section of the flat floor entirely, so essentially giving full airflow to the transmission tunnel. Now, the downside with this is it kind of makes the whole flat floor thing, the whole flat floor idea, kind of a little bit irrelevant because we're missing out on at least part of the usefulness of that floor. So the third option, which we are hoping we'll be able to use, is by essentially incorporating a series of NACA ducts to run airflow up into the transmission tunnel. It's not ideal, but obviously it doesn't really matter how effective the aero package is if we cook everything in the transmission tunnel and the car can't complete more than a few laps. Well, that's going to be problematic. Once we've got this all set up, what we're going to do is head to our local track and do some aero testing. Now, with the data that we've got on the car, I'll admit we can't get perfect results, but we can at least get some guidance on what the aero package is doing. And this comes from our shock travel potentiometers. So essentially, in a nutshell, by zeroing the ride height of those sensors when we are stationary in the pits, and then heading out onto the track and looking at the relative position of the front and rear dampers at 0 speed in pit lane versus what they're doing at 200, 220 kilometers an hour at the fastest parts of the track. It's going to give us an idea of essentially how much the aero is pushing down and compressing that suspension. Now, yes, there are a number of other factors, and I know this isn't a bulletproof way of generating downforce numbers, but it is a good guide. And what we can do is essentially go to the track, test with and without the flat floor, test with and without the rear diffuser, and really get a bit of a sense of exactly what those components are doing and how much useful downforce we're actually generating from them. So pretty excited to see how that all works out. At the same time, we are also upgrading the anti-roll bars in the car, and this is something that I've been wanting to deal with for a while, but it's all a case of time and priorities on the car. At the moment, we are running a TRD anti-roll bar on the front because the white line adjustable anti-roll bar that we have sitting on the shelf unfortunately doesn't fit with the SR20 sump. It's a 2-position adjustable bar, but it is tiny. I can't remember off the top of my hand, off the top of my head, the outside diameter, but it is really small. It's essentially a street upgrade for a factory Toyota 86 anti-roll bar. Likewise, at the back we do have the white line adjustable bar on that, but again, it's designed primarily for a street application. So what we are going to be doing is incorporating a blade adjustable anti-roll bar, which is essentially what you see on most professional race cars. And Brandon went ahead and dummied up these components. So essentially we're going to have a chromoly bar that runs from the left to the right of the chassis. Fortunately, one of the upsides of the SR conversion with the dry sump is it actually leaves a nice straight run from one side of the car to the other, which will take this straight bar. So there's a bush that goes in here allowing that bar to rotate. We've obviously, this is kind of mirror image, so we've got the same on the other side. And then we've got the blade adjustable component here. So this is all just 3D printed at the moment, so we could dummy it all up and get a sense of what was going to fit, basically run the suspension through full travel, full wheel movement, and make sure that everything was going to actually clear. It looks like it's all going to work quite nicely. And the idea behind this component, unfortunately I don't have it in my hand so I can't show you, but essentially by rotating this through 90 degrees, we can dramatically influence the amount of stiffness in that anti-roll bar. So as you can see at the moment, in this position here, basically we've got that blade component is vertical, so that gives a lot of stiffness to that component. So this is essentially in the maximum stiffness location. However, if we rotate that 90 degrees, we end up with that blade component essentially sitting this way. It's quite narrow, as you can see there, and that allows a designed amount of flex into that, so it softens the anti-roll bar. So we're going to be going with one of these front and another one slightly smaller in size in the rear, and that's going to also be in-cabin adjustable. So what it's going to do is allow us two advantages here. One, we will be able to adjust the handling balance of the car. So it's helpful if the driver can influence the handling balance, and this handling balance will also change during a race as the tires degrade, etc. The other aspect with an endurance car, which is a real advantage, is we start the race with 110 litres of fuel on board. It's a significant amount of weight. Unfortunately, with a compromised design with our fuel system, a significant amount of that weight is actually rearward of the rear axle line. So it's not ideal, but it is what it is. This means that as our fuel load burns off, we do get quite a dramatic change in the handling balance. So by being able to adjust those anti-roll bars as the race progresses, it's going to allow us to hopefully optimize the handling balance, get the car set up a bit more to the driver's liking, and hopefully that's going to end up resulting in faster lap times, maybe a little bit less tire wear to go along with it. Next up, I have mentioned a couple of weeks ago that we are going to be producing a new course. It's in early stages of development now, so it's a little way off yet, but this is a WinOLS course which we've been asked for a long time. And essentially WinOLS is a binary editor software. It allows you to basically load a raw file out of an ECU and then find and define maps inside of that file, and then you can also edit those maps using different pieces of software and hardware there to read the map out of the ECU and then write it back in. So in order to help us with the development of this course, we have purchased a Mark V Volkswagen Golf GTI. So not the latest and greatest. When we get into the WinOLS world, there is a massive range of cars that this software is useful for. Basically just about anything for that matter, but we see that it is used more significantly in the European tuning market. So what we're intending to do with this is basically produce a number of worked examples using WinOLS and then update the car continuously. So this will be hopefully a reasonably frequently changed vehicle, but it is also quite amazing now for a Mark V VW Golf how much performance is available for a relatively modest entry cost. Now, the other aspect with the VW Golf, the Mark V Golf here, is that it is supported by HP tuners as well. And this gives us a bit of an insight into how the different software packages look. So let's have a quick dive over into HP tuners here. And this is probably familiar to just about anyone who's already dealt with HP tuners. Here we've got a range of different tabs here. So for example, we've got idle, we've got airflow. At the moment we are on our fuel tab, and then a bunch of sub tabs under that. The tab here that I am on, temperature control. Basically this is control for component protection of our air fuel ratio, and we've got some target lambda tables here for various operating conditions. And if we open one of those up here, pretty conventional, looks like what we would expect from a lambda target table. We've got our engine load on the vertical axis, and we've got our engine speed on the horizontal axis. So the nice thing with HP tuners is, as far as the tuner is concerned, it takes the heavy lifting out of the equation. HP tuners and their engineers have done all of the work in the background, and basically when we read that file out of the Volkswagen Golf, it tells the software has what's called a definition file, which I liken to a roadmap. So it says for the component over temperature lambda variant 0 table, that one that we're just looking at, you're going to find that particular table at this address, and it is this size, and you'll find the axes at this point, and they are this size. So then it displays it in a nice graphical format that we can understand. It's really simple and easy to understand for us. It's easy to manipulate, and then we can flash it back into the car. So that's great, but there's not a lot of vehicles. They are expanding all the time. There's not a lot of vehicles, or not all vehicles are supported with HP tuners. So that's where OLS comes in. So let's have a quick look and see kind of what that actually looks like inside WinOLS. And it kind of looks, admittedly, like we're looking into the matrix a little bit, and it can be a little bit confusing. So this is a tuned file that we have got overlaid with a comparison here. And what we can see here is this red square indicates that this area is actually a defined map. And what we can do here is we can click on this, and we can open our component protection table. So this is essentially the exact same table that we were just looking at, but this is what it looks like in OLS. So we've got the same axes as we saw in HP tuners. We've got our engine load on the vertical axis, we've got our engine RPM, of course, on the horizontal axis, and then we've got our actual target lambda values inside of this table. So the problem with this is, at least initially, when we are getting started with WinOLS, we don't necessarily know what the tables are going to be. And this is the part that I know puts off a lot of tuners who want to get involved with OLS, is understanding what to do with it in the first place. And understandably, a lot of the tuners out there who are experienced with OLS tuning don't really want to tell you exactly what to do or how it all works. And yes, there are some YouTube instructional videos out there, but most of the ones that I've seen at least leave a lot to be desired. So it's a kind of a secretive world, and not a lot of people wanting to help others, which coincidentally is one of the reasons why High Performance Academy was founded in the first place. The other problem is, even once you have found what you think to be a valid map, you're going to find that the numbers won't necessarily come across as something readable, something that makes sense to us, like the ones that we have got in front of us. So we jump back to my laptop screen again for a moment. When we load this up, these are going to be raw numbers. So we've actually converted these. We've applied a factor there to turn these into an understandable load value. Likewise, the numbers in this lambda table itself, these won't give us a nice lambda target. These again will just be raw numbers. So it's a case of understanding what the tables are, and then understanding how to apply a factor to those raw numbers so that we can actually understand them. Now, if that's all sounding a little bit like it's too hard, don't worry, I've been through about 2 months of training on this so far with a WinOLS expert who's helping us out develop this course. It's been a steep learning curve, but I have actually really enjoyed it. And it's not actually as scary as it sounds. There's two aspects that go along with this. The first of these is understanding how a late model factory engine management system works. So basically understanding the logic flow, and all of these late management systems from the likes of Bosch are all torque based. So understanding what tables will exist inside the engine management system. If we understand what's there, then we know what we're going to be looking for and what we need to find in order to actually make useful tuning changes. Now, where it comes into the next part is finding these tables inside the raw file, and this on face value seems quite challenging. We already saw kind of what that looked like, and if we jump back to my laptop screen, basically as we cycle through, this is what we are faced with. And again, I know it looks kind of daunting. The reality though is that there are some common patterns or shapes that we see with the mainstream tables that we are going to need to find. So that's what we're going to be teaching within this course, is understanding how the engine management system works, what the logic flow of the tuning process is, what tables exist, and what we need to find in order to make good quality tuning changes. And then once we know what tables we're looking for, what patterns are we looking for inside this raw file so we can actually find them. So again, might sound a little bit scary at this stage, but really excited about that course. And if we jump back across to my laptop screen again, now pretty much very early stages of tuning on this particular card. It didn't really help that it actually started with a tune file. So this blue line here, that was the baseline as delivered. So you can see at the moment the green file that we've run that we've got up there, which was what we've referred to as a stage 1 bench flash there, has taken us from 192 horsepower at 4800 RPM up to 226.8. Again, understanding that this was already a lightly tuned vehicle and no hardware has been changed on it. Still a little bit of work to do because we do have a little bit of power left on the table up in the top end. So yeah, that's probably still a few months away, but really excited to be bringing that course out, and we'll bring you some more information as we get a little bit closer. Right, just give me a second and I'll head back across to my notes here. I just quickly wanted to touch on an Instagram that we put up a couple of days ago. And every time we put up a photo of a turbocharger or an engine bay with a turbocharger with no air filter on it, which we see frequently at drag meetings, we inevitably get someone, often more than one person, ask why, when, particularly in this case, hopefully you can see, there's pretty clear indication that there's been some nasty damage to this compressor wheel. Valid question. The problem we do see is twofold. First of all, when we're looking at an engine like this RB26, which is the Croydon Racing Development R32 GTR, I don't quite know where they are in the battle at the moment. I'm pretty sure at the time we shot this, it was the fastest street legal R32 GTR in the world, running deep into the sixes anyway. Needless to say, pretty damn fast. These engines are producing anywhere from sort of 2 to 3,000 plus horsepower, and it can be challenging in a modern engine bay to find an air filter that will fit and effectively filter that air without adding some kind of restriction to the mix. So that's why some people do choose to go without. The other aspect that we see a lot with tube frame drag cars is that often the air intake will actually funnel air straight from the front of the car body, and that often makes it difficult to incorporate an air filter. The design is sort of intended to ram air at high speed and gain some advantage from that, but again, it makes it difficult to incorporate an air filter, unfortunately. Now, not all is lost, because at the drag strip we do generally have the advantage that we're not going to be following other cars down the strip. The strip is normally relatively clean compared to out on the road or maybe on a racetrack where there's often a lot of debris being kicked up, stones, etc. So generally the conditions are at least a little bit better for turbo life expectancy, but as you can see here, that's not always the case. And we do need to factor in, is the extra 5 or 10 horsepower that we're going to gain by removing the air filter worth the expense of replacing an expensive billet compressor wheel or maybe your entire turbocharger? If you're running a methanol drag engine that doesn't run any intercooler, if something big enough goes through that turbocharger, it can end up taking out your whole engine as well. So a few things to weigh up. Now, last for today, just wanted to remind you all, if you have been hiding under a rock, we have the HPA Tuned In podcast. And we'll head over to that. You can find it at hpatunedin.com, but you'll also be able to listen to Tuned In anywhere you currently listen to podcasts. I tend to prefer Apple Podcasts, but I know plenty of people also use Spotify. And over the years, both with our podcast and with our in-person interviews on YouTube, I've had the pleasure of interviewing some really smart people involved in just about all forms of motorsport. However, this was a first for me. Our last episode that's just dropped is an interview with the Stig. This is Ben Collins, the Stig from the BBC Top Gear program. And obviously, if anyone has watched Top Gear, the Stig is a bit of a legend. He has driven just about every car imaginable, and he's also beaten some of the fastest professional drivers out there as well. So he's managed to keep a pretty good score around the test track for Top Gear. In particular though, Ben Collins isn't just involved, or he obviously hasn't been working as a Stig for some time now, but he also does other things in professional driving, including stunt driving. So he has been the stunt driver for a number of the James Bond movies, as well as the Fast and Furious. So really interesting to sit down with Ben and to get some insight into how he got started in motorsport. We talk in particular as well, and I know this is something that I hear from a lot of enthusiasts about, those drivers who are born with some kind of natural talent or natural gift when it comes to driving. They just seem to know where to position the car and exactly how much grip is available. Unfortunately for the rest of us mere mortals, we don't get to benefit from that, and instead we have to learn that the hard way. But we talked to Ben about whether or not we can, if we aren't born with that God-given gift, if it's possible to actually develop that. So if you're interested in finding out more, check out that episode of the podcast. We launch a new episode every week. We'd love it if you could give us a rating. Let us know what you think as well with a review, and please make sure you subscribe. The more ratings and reviews we get, the easier it is for us to get visibility, which is going to help us to get more high quality guests in the future. Alrighty, we'll leave it there for our pre-show. Thanks for watching. Give me a few moments and we'll get started with today's lesson. If you like that video, make sure you give it a thumbs up, and if you're not already a subscriber, make sure you're subscribed. We release a new video every week. And if you like free stuff, we've got a great deal for you. Click the link in the description to claim your free spot to our next live lesson.